The German Shepherd wouldn't stop digging at the same spot on the cabin floor, and Robert Castillo knew from 23 years of military service that when Ranger acted this persistent, something was buried that shouldn't stay hidden. The scratching had started 3 nights ago, always in the same corner of the main room, where the old pine floorboards met the stone foundation. Robert had tried everything, treats, commands, even moving Ranger's bed to the opposite side of the cabin. But each night, the dog returned to that spot with the focused determination of an animal following instincts that ran deeper than training. Robert stood in his doorway at 3 a.m., watching Ranger's powerful claws work methodically at the wooden planks, creating shallow gouges that spoke of obsessive purpose. The German Shepherd's behavior reminded him of bomb detection dogs he'd worked with in Iraq. That same single-minded focus that meant something dangerous was hidden beneath the surface. For those who understand that some secrets refuse to stay buried, this story will reveal how the past and present collide in ways that change everything we think we know about history. If you've ever wondered what mysteries might be hidden beneath your own feet, you're about to discover that some truths have been waiting decades to surface. And the people who share these incredible stories of hidden history and buried secrets are the ones who make these discoveries possible. The cabin had seemed perfect when Robert bought it 6 months ago, isolated, peaceful, surrounded by enough Colorado wilderness to ensure that the nightmares from 3 tours overseas couldn't follow him into civilian life. The previous owner, an elderly man named Wilhelm Brenner, had been eager to sell, claiming the property held too many memories for an old man to bear alone. Robert had assumed Brenner meant memories of his late wife, or perhaps the simple melancholy that comes with age and isolation. He hadn't thought to ask what kind of memories might drive a man to abandon a home his family had owned for over 70 years. Now, watching Ranger's increasingly frantic digging, Robert began to wonder what Wilhelm Brenner had known about this property that he'd chosen not to share. At 51, Robert carried the accumulated weight of too many classified operations, too many friends lost in places that didn't officially exist. His graying hair and the network of scars across his hands told stories of service in units whose names appeared on no public records. The German Shepherd had been his partner through the worst of it, Afghanistan, Syria, and operations that would remain classified long after both of them were dead. Ranger had saved Robert's life more times than either of them could count, had been his anchor to sanity when the darkness threatened to consume everything he'd once believed about honor and sacrifice. If the dog believed something was hidden beneath the cabin floor, then Robert would trust that judgment completely. "All right, boy," Robert said, moving to kneel beside his agitated companion. "Show me what's got you so worked up." Ranger's response was to dig faster, his claws now penetrating through the pine planks to scrape against something solid underneath. The sound was different, not the hollow thud of wood against earth, but the metallic ring of claws against metal. Robert felt his pulse quicken with recognition. That sound meant human construction, deliberate concealment, secrets buried with military precision. He'd heard it before in places where discovering hidden objects could mean the difference between completing a mission and never coming home. "Range your back," Robert commanded, and the German Shepherd immediately obeyed, though his amber eyes remained fixed on the scratched floorboards with unwavering intensity. Robert examined the damaged wood more carefully, noting details that his military training had taught him to recognize. The planks in this section were slightly different from the rest, newer wood stained to match the original flooring, installed with just enough precision to fool casual observation. Someone had replaced a section of the original floor, probably decades ago, creating a concealed access point to whatever lay beneath the cabin. Robert retrieved a crowbar from his tool collection and began carefully prying up the replaced planks. The wood came away easily, revealing not the dirt foundation he'd expected, but a steel hatch built flush with the cabin's substructure. The hatch bore markings that made Robert's hands shake with recognition and impossible understanding. stenciled numbers in a font he recognized from military equipment, but dating from an era when his grandfather had been fighting different wars on distant continents. Projekt Ahnenherbe, 1943, Verschlüsselung Stufe 7. German text from 1943. Classification markings that suggested whatever lay below had been important enough to hide from Allied forces during World War II. Robert looked at Ranger, whose tail was wagging with the satisfaction of a mission accomplished. The dog had led him to something that had been concealed for over 70 years, hidden beneath a cabin in the Colorado mountains by people whose motives were lost to history. Ranger, Robert said quietly, what did Wilhelm Brenner leave for us to find? The German shepherd's response was to move to the steel hatch and place his paw on the central locking mechanism, as if he understood that opening this door would change both their lives forever. Robert studied the locking system, noting the complexity of a mechanism designed to protect whatever lay below from discovery by Allied intelligence services. The lock was sophisticated for 1943 technology, suggesting that the contents were valuable enough to justify significant resources and risk. But there was something else about the hatch that made Robert's military instincts scream caution. Fresh oil on the hinges, recent maintenance on the locking mechanism, signs that someone had been accessing this hidden chamber long after the war ended. Wilhelm Brenner hadn't just known about what was hidden beneath the cabin. He'd been maintaining it, protecting it, keeping whatever secrets lay below safe from discovery for over 7 decades. Robert looked at Ranger, whose patient alertness suggested the dog was ready for whatever they might find in the darkness below. Boy, Robert said, his hand hovering over the lock, I think we're about to learn why the previous owner was so eager to leave this place. Some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. Some secrets, once revealed, changed everything you thought you knew about the world. And some dogs had instincts that could lead their partners into the heart of history itself. Robert turned the locking mechanism, and the steel hatch opened with a pneumatic hiss that suggested the chamber below was still sealed, still protecting whatever had been hidden there since 1943. Ranger's bark echoed into the darkness, a sound of excitement and anticipation that seemed to carry across 70 years of buried history. The steel ladder descended 20 feet into a chamber that smelled of preservation oil and secrets that had been waiting 70 years for discovery. Robert climbed down first, his flashlight beam revealing a space that defied everything he thought he knew about his remote Colorado property. The chamber wasn't a simple root cellar or storm shelter. It was a sophisticated underground facility built with the kind of precision that spoke of military engineering and unlimited resources. Ranger followed with the confident grace of a working dog, his enhanced senses immediately processing information about their new environment. The German shepherd's body language suggested alertness rather than alarm, as if the chamber held familiar scents and sounds that triggered recognition rather than caution. Jesus, Robert breathed, playing his light across walls lined with steel plates and ventilation systems that had been designed to support long-term habitation. The main chamber was roughly the size of his cabin's footprint, but Robert could see corridors branching off into deeper sections of the underground complex. This wasn't just a hiding place. It was a complete facility designed to house people and equipment for extended periods. But it was the contents of the main chamber that made Robert's hands shake with recognition and impossible understanding. Maps covered every available wall surface, detailed topographical charts of the western United States, marked with symbols and notations in German script, strategic locations, military installations, transportation networks, and population centers, all cataloged with the methodical precision of an intelligence operation. Wooden crates stacked along the walls bore German military markings and inventory numbers that suggested significant resources had been dedicated to whatever operation this facility supported. Radio equipment, maps, weapons, and supplies enough to support a substantial mission. And at the center of it all, a desk bearing documents that made Robert's blood run cold with understanding. Operation Bernhard. SS Oberfuhrer Wilhelm Brenner. Rocky Mountain Command Post. 1943 to 1945. Brenner, Robert said, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. The old man who sold me this cabin wasn't just the previous owner. He was the Nazi who built this place. Ranger moved through the chamber with purposeful intelligence, his nose working to process scents that carried information about the facility's history and contents. The dog's behavior suggested he was tracking something specific, following traces that had been left by people who were long dead. Robert opened one of the wooden crates and found contents that confirmed his worst suspicions. German uniforms, Nazi insignia, and identity documents bearing Wilhelm Brenner's photograph and SS rank. But there were also American documents, forged identities, citizenship papers, and integration materials that told the story of how a Nazi officer had successfully disappeared into American society after the war. Operation Paperclip, Robert realized, understanding the historical context that had allowed Nazi scientists and officers to escape prosecution in exchange for their knowledge and expertise. Brenner wasn't just hiding from Allied forces, he was working with them. The documents revealed a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of American intelligence services. Nazi officers brought to the United States to continue their research, their wartime crimes forgiven in exchange for their cooperation in the developing Cold War against the Soviet Union. But Wilhelm Brenner's operation had been different. The facility beneath Robert's cabin wasn't designed for scientific research. It was designed for something far more sinister. Ranger's urgent barking drew Robert's attention to a section of the chamber that he'd initially missed. Behind a false wall was another room, this one containing equipment and documents that made his military training scream danger. Communication equipment, codes and ciphers, contact lists and operational plans for a network that extended throughout the American West. Wilhelm Brenner hadn't just been a Nazi officer hiding in America. He'd been a commander of a sleeper cell designed to activate in the event of a successful German invasion, to coordinate sabotage and intelligence operations from within conquered American territory. How many more? Robert asked aloud, studying maps that showed similar facilities marked throughout Colorado, Montana, and Wyoming. How many other Nazi hideouts are still out there? Ranger's response was to move to a specific section of the documentation, his behavior suggesting that the dog had found something that required immediate attention. The files Ranger had located contained records of ongoing operations, activities that continued long after the war ended, missions that suggested the Nazi network had adapted and evolved rather than disbanded, financial records showing regular payments to accounts throughout the American West, personnel files for individuals who had maintained contact with Brenner into the 1990s, and most disturbing of all, evidence that the network had been monitoring and influencing local politics, law enforcement, and military installations for over 50 years. They never stopped, Robert said, understanding the scope of what he'd discovered. The war ended, but the mission continued. But it was the final section of documents that revealed why Wilhelm Brenner had been so eager to sell the property and disappear. Recent correspondence indicating that the network was planning to activate for a final operation, something called Operation Valkyrie American, that would use the infrastructure built over 7 decades to launch coordinated attacks on American government facilities. The documents were dated just 6 months ago, the same time Brenner had put the property up for sale. Robert looked at Ranger, whose alert posture suggested that the dog's instincts had led them to more than historical artifacts. This was an active threat, a conspiracy that was still operational, still dangerous. Ranger, Robert said grimly, I think we just walked into something that's about to get very complicated. The German shepherd's response was to move to the chamber's communication equipment, where red lights indicated that monitoring systems were still active. still transmitting information to unknown recipients. Someone knew they had found the facility. Someone was watching. And somewhere in the American West, a Nazi network that had operated in secret for over 70 years was preparing to complete a mission that had begun during World War II. Robert's retreat to a peaceful cabin in the mountains had just become the front line of a war that had never really ended. The communication equipment in the Nazi bunker had been transmitting their location for the past 48 hours, and Rangers' increasingly agitated behavior suggested that unwelcome visitors were approaching through the Colorado wilderness. Robert studied the electronic systems that Wilhelm Brenner had maintained for over 70 years, noting details that made his special operations training scream danger. Motion sensors throughout the underground facility, automated transmission protocols that activated when the bunker was accessed, a security network designed to alert unknown recipients when the Nazi hideout was discovered. Ranger paced near the bunker's entrance ladder, his body language radiating the controlled tension Robert recognized from their combat deployments. The German Shepherd's enhanced senses were detecting movement in the forest surrounding the cabin, multiple contacts approaching with tactical coordination. "How many, boy?" Robert asked, trusting his partner's assessment more than any electronic surveillance system. Ranger's response was a series of soft barks that Robert interpreted as tactical intelligence. 6 hostiles, military training, coordinated approach patterns. Professionals who knew about the bunker and were coming to eliminate witnesses to its discovery. Robert gathered the most damning documents from Brenner's files, evidence of the ongoing Nazi network, operational plans for attacks on American facilities, and contact information for conspirators who had spent decades infiltrating government institutions. But it was Ranger's continued investigation of the bunker that revealed something even more disturbing. The dog had found a section of the facility that Robert had initially overlooked, a laboratory area equipped with chemical processing equipment and biological storage systems that spoke of research far more sinister than simple intelligence gathering. What were they working on down here? Robert asked, studying equipment that looked decades ahead of 1940s technology. Documents in the laboratory section revealed experiments that made Robert's stomach turn with recognition and revulsion. Biological weapons research, chemical compounds designed to contaminate water supplies, genetic modification programs that pushed the boundaries of wartime science into areas that violated every principle of human decency. Wilhelm Brenner hadn't just been running a sleeper cell. He'd been developing weapons of mass destruction in the heart of American territory. But the most disturbing discovery was evidence that the research had continued long after the war ended, supported by American government contracts that suggested official knowledge and approval of the Nazi network's activities. Operation Paperclip brought them here, Robert realized. But someone in the U.S. government kept them funded and operational. Ranger's warning bark echoed through the bunker as the sound of vehicles reached the cabin above. Robert could hear engines shutting off, doors closing, and the careful footsteps of people who were trying to approach without detection. Robert activated his satellite phone and began transmitting the most critical documents to secure servers, ensuring that evidence of the Nazi network would survive even if he and Ranger didn't. But the transmission was interrupted by jamming equipment that suggested their visitors had resources that exceeded normal law enforcement capabilities. "Ranger," Robert said grimly, "I think we're about to meet some of Brenner's old friends." The German Shepherd's response was to position himself near the bunker's secondary exit, a tunnel that led to an emergence point several hundred yards from the cabin. Ranger's military training was guiding them toward the tactical option that offered the best chance of survival. But as they prepared to evacuate through the escape tunnel, Robert realized they couldn't leave without ensuring that the Nazi facility was destroyed. The research equipment, the biological weapons, and the communication systems that had alerted the network to their discovery. All of it had to be eliminated before it could be used against American civilians. "We need to burn this place," Robert said, But Ranger's response suggested that destruction wouldn't be as simple as setting a fire. The dog led Robert to a section of the bunker that contained something that made his hands shake with understanding. Explosive charges, professionally installed and wired to a dead man's switch that would detonate if the facility was compromised. Wilhelm Brenner had rigged his bunker to self-destruct rather than fall into enemy hands. But the system required manual activation from someone who knew the proper protocols. Brenner left us a way to destroy his life's work, Robert said, studying the demolition system. But using it means we have maybe 3 minutes to reach the surface before this whole mountain comes down. Rangers barking from the escape tunnel indicated that time was running out. The people searching the cabin above were professionals who would find the concealed hatch soon, and their response to discovering an active Nazi facility would depend on whether they were legitimate law enforcement or part of the network that had protected Brenner for 7 decades. Robert made his decision. He activated the demolition sequence and followed Ranger into the escape tunnel, knowing that destroying the bunker would eliminate evidence of the Nazi network, but might also destroy proof of American government complicity in protecting war criminals. The tunnel was narrow and dark, carved through rock with the same precision that had characterized the entire underground facility. Robert could hear Ranger ahead of him, the dog's enhanced senses guiding them toward an exit that would place them in defensive positions overlooking the cabin. Behind them, the demolition timer counted down toward an explosion that would erase 70 years of Nazi presence in the American West. But as they reached the tunnel's exit, Robert realized that destroying Brenner's bunker was only the beginning. The documents he'd photographed contained evidence of similar facilities throughout the mountain states, a network of Nazi hideouts that had been operating in secret since World War II. Ranger, Robert said as they emerged into the Colorado wilderness, I think we just declared war on people who've been planning this fight for 70 years. The German shepherd's response was a low growl that suggested he was ready for whatever came next. The explosion that destroyed Wilhelm Brenner's bunker shook the mountain and lit the night sky with flames that could be seen for 50 miles. But somewhere in the darkness, members of a Nazi network that had survived in secret for over 7 decades were preparing to complete a mission that had begun during the darkest days of World War II. Robert and Ranger had exposed the conspiracy, but stopping it would require a battle that would determine whether American democracy could survive an enemy that had been hiding in plain sight for generations. The Federal Bureau of Investigation's Denver field office had been infiltrated by Nazi sympathizers for over 40 years, and Agent Sarah Morrison was about to discover that some conspiracies run deeper than any government agency could imagine. Robert crouched in the tree line overlooking his destroyed cabin, watching federal agents process a crime scene that had just become exponentially more complicated. The explosion had eliminated Wilhelm Brenner's bunker, but the investigation it triggered was revealing connections that reached into the highest levels of American law enforcement. Ranger pressed against his leg, the German shepherd's body language indicating recognition of specific individuals among the federal response team. The dog's enhanced senses were processing information about people whose sense triggered memories of previous encounters, suggesting that some of the agents investigating the Nazi bunker had been there before. You know them, don't you? Robert asked quietly. Ranger's response was a low growl directed at a tall man in an FBI jacket who was coordinating the investigation with suspicious efficiency. Agent Bradley Hoffman moved through the crime scene with the familiarity of someone who had expected this discovery, who had been preparing for this moment. Robert's satellite phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Agent Morrison. Do not trust the federal response team. Network infiltration confirmed. Need to meet safely. Through his binoculars, Robert could see Morrison standing apart from the main investigation team, her body language suggesting she was documenting evidence rather than coordinating with her colleagues. She was taking photographs of the other agents, recording their activities, treating them as subjects of surveillance rather than partners in the investigation. Sarah Morrison, Robert said to himself, recognizing the name from his research into the Nazi documents. She'd been mentioned in Wilhelm Brenner's files as a federal agent who had been asking uncomfortable questions about historical immigration records and unexplained government contracts. Ranger's sudden alertness drew Robert's attention to movement in the forest around their position. Armed figures were advancing through the trees with tactical precision, surrounding the crime scene and establishing a perimeter that had nothing to do with normal FBI protocols. Private military contractors, Robert realized, noting the equipment and coordination that exceeded standard law enforcement capabilities. The contractors weren't there to protect the investigation. They were there to eliminate witnesses and control the narrative about what had been discovered in the Nazi bunker. Robert watched Agent Morrison's reaction as the contractors took positions around the crime scene. Her hand moved toward her sidearm, her posture shifting from investigative alertness to defensive preparation. She had recognized the threat and was preparing to fight for her life. "Ranger," Robert said, "we need to help her." The German shepherd's response was immediate approval, his military training recognizing Morrison as an ally who needed tactical support against overwhelming odds. Robert moved through the forest with the silent precision of special operations training, positioning himself where he could provide covering fire for Morrison while remaining concealed from the contractors who were preparing to eliminate everyone who had seen evidence of the Nazi network. The confrontation began with a single suppressed gunshot that took down the FBI agent standing closest to Morrison. What followed was a coordinated assault designed to eliminate all witnesses to the bunker's discovery, while making it appear that the investigation had been compromised by foreign terrorists. Morrison's response proved that she was more than a desk-bound federal agent. She moved with the tactical awareness of someone who had received advanced combat training, using the crime scene itself as cover while returning fire at contractors who had underestimated her capabilities. But she was outnumbered 12-1, and the contractors had positioned themselves to eliminate escape routes while maintaining superior firepower. Robert's intervention changed the tactical equation completely. His rifle spoke with the authority of a soldier who had survived conflicts in places that didn't officially exist. Each shot placed with precision that eliminated threats while avoiding collateral damage to legitimate law enforcement personnel who were caught in the crossfire. Ranger's contribution was even more decisive. The German shepherd moved through the contractors like a force of nature, using enhanced capabilities that exceeded normal canine parameters to disrupt their coordination and create opportunities for Robert and Morrison to gain tactical advantage. The battle lasted 17 minutes and ended with 8 contractors dead and the remainder in retreat toward extraction vehicles that had been positioned beyond the crime scene perimeter. Morrison approached Robert's position with her weapon lowered but ready, her expression mixing gratitude with professional wariness. "Agent Morrison," Robert called out. "I'm Robert Castillo, former Special Operations. I'm the one who found the Nazi bunker." "I've been investigating Wilhelm Brenner for 3 years," Morrison replied, studying Robert with the assessment skills of a federal agent. "What you discover confirms intelligence I've been gathering about Nazi infiltration of American institutions." Ranger moved between them, his body language indicating approval of Morrison as a trustworthy ally. The dog's enhanced senses had evaluated her scent, voice patterns, and behavioral cues, determining that she posed no threat to their mission. "How deep does the infiltration go?" Robert asked. Morrison's expression darkened. "Deeper than you can imagine. Brenner's network has been operating for 70 years, placing people in law enforcement, military commands, and government agencies. The contractors who just tried to kill us were coordinated through FBI communication channels." She showed Robert evidence that made his military training scream danger. Communication intercepts proving that the Nazi network had advance warning of every federal investigation, that they had been protected by people within the American government who shared their ideology. Operation Valkyrie American isn't just about attacking government facilities, Morrison continued. It's about replacing American democracy with a system that the original Nazis would recognize and approve. Robert looked at the evidence Morrison had gathered, understanding that destroying Brenner's bunker had been only the first step in exposing a conspiracy that threatened the foundation of American society. "What do we do now?" Robert asked. Morrison's smile was grim but determined. "Now we use Brenner's own documentation to hunt down every facility, every contact, every sympathizer in his network. We're going to finish what should have been done in 1945. Ranger barked once, a sound of approval that suggested the dog was ready for a mission that would honor the memory of every soldier who had died fighting against Nazi ideology. Robert understood that his retreat to a peaceful cabin in the mountains had become the opening battle in a war that would determine whether American democracy could survive an enemy that had been hiding in plain sight for generations. The Nazi network had spent 70 years preparing for this moment, but they hadn't counted on a special operations veteran and his enhanced German shepherd whose loyalty to freedom was stronger than any ideology of hatred. The abandoned mine complex in the Sawtooth Mountains held secrets that made Wilhelm Brenner's bunker look like a training exercise, and Ranger's behavior suggested they were walking into the operational heart of a conspiracy that had been growing for 70 years. Agent Morrison led Robert and Ranger through mountain passes that showed evidence of recent military activity. Tire tracks from heavy vehicles, communication equipment hidden among natural rock formations, and surveillance cameras disguised as wildlife monitoring devices. The Nazi network hadn't just survived in hiding. They had thrived, building infrastructure that rivaled official government installations. This facility was identified in Brenner's files as the Regional Command Center, Morrison explained, studying intelligence that Robert had recovered from the destroyed bunker. But satellite surveillance suggests it's much larger than historical records indicated. Ranger's enhanced senses were processing information that made his body language shift from alert reconnaissance to combat preparation. The German shepherd could detect human scents, electronic equipment, and chemical signatures that indicated the facility ahead was heavily occupied and actively defended. Robert studied the mine complex through binoculars, noting defensive positions and security measures that exceeded anything he'd seen during classified operations in hostile territory. "This isn't just a hideout," he said grimly. "This is a military installation." The facility sprawled across several acres of mountainside, with multiple tunnel entrances connected by surface roads that had been carefully camouflaged to avoid satellite detection. Guard towers disguised as mining equipment provided overlapping fields of fire, while communication arrays reached towards satellites that might not belong to the American government. But it was the personnel moving through the facility that made Robert's hands shake with recognition and dread. Uniformed figures whose equipment and coordination spoke of military training. Vehicles bearing markings that combined Nazi symbolism with modern American military insignia. And worst of all, flag displays that showed the twisted cross of Nazi ideology, flying alongside versions of the American flag that had been modified to reflect the network's vision of what the United States should become. "How many people are we looking at?" Morrison asked. Robert counted movement patterns and estimated garrison strength with the tactical assessment skills that had kept him alive through multiple deployments. At least 200 personnel, probably more in the underground sections. This isn't just a network, it's an army. Ranger's sudden alertness drew their attention to activity near the main facility entrance. A convoy was arriving, vehicles bearing officials whose presence suggested that the Nazi network's influence reached far beyond mountain hideouts and secret bunkers. Through his binoculars, Robert recognized faces that made his blood run cold. Politicians he'd seen on television, military officers whose careers had spanned decades of service, business leaders whose companies had government contracts worth billions of dollars. "The network's leadership," Morrison said, photographing the arrivals with equipment that would provide evidence for prosecutions that could reshape American politics. They're gathering for something big. But Rangers' continued investigation of their surveillance position revealed something that changed the tactical situation completely. The dog had detected electronic surveillance equipment that indicated their observation post was compromised, that the facility's security had detected their presence. "We've been made," Robert said, watching guards move toward their position with the coordination of a military response team. Morrison was already coordinating with FBI assets, transmitting intelligence about the facility while preparing for extraction under hostile fire. But the communication was being jammed by equipment that suggested the Nazi network had capabilities that matched or exceeded federal law enforcement resources. "They're not just hiding anymore," Morrison realized. "They're actively engaging federal agencies in warfare." The assault on their position came from multiple directions simultaneously. Professional soldiers using military tactics and equipment to eliminate witnesses to the network's gathering. But Robert's special operations training and Rangers' enhanced capabilities provided advantages that the attackers hadn't anticipated. The German Shepherd moved through the engagement like a force of nature, his genetically enhanced senses allowing him to predict enemy movements and coordinate tactical responses that exceeded normal military working dog capabilities. Robert's rifle spoke with the authority of a soldier who had survived the worst combat zones in the world, each shot eliminating threats while providing covering fire for Morrison's attempts to establish communication with federal backup. But the most shocking aspect of the battle was the equipment and tactics used by the Nazi network's forces. Advanced weapons, military vehicles, and coordination that suggested access to current American military technology and training. "They're not just infiltrating the military," Robert realized during a brief pause in the fighting. "They are the military." Morrison's intelligence gathering during the engagement revealed the true scope of what they were facing. Radio intercepts showing coordination with multiple government agencies, equipment that bore current military serial numbers, and most damning of all, tactical coordination that was being directed from within federal command structures. The Nazi network hadn't just survived World War II. They had evolved into a shadow government that controlled significant portions of the American military-industrial complex. "Robert," Morrison called out during the firefight, "we need to get into that facility. Whatever they're planning, it's happening now." Rangers' response to the tactical challenge was to lead them toward a section of the mine complex that offered concealed access to the underground facility. The dog's enhanced genetics included capabilities that allowed him to detect structural weaknesses and hidden passages that human observation couldn't identify. The infiltration route Ranger identified led them through abandoned mining tunnels that connected to the Nazi facility's ventilation system. As they descended into the mountain's heart, they could hear sounds that made Robert's special operations training scream danger: machinery, electrical equipment, and human voices speaking German in dialects that hadn't been heard since the fall of the Third Reich. "They're not just preserving Nazi ideology," Morrison said as they moved through the tunnels. "They're recreating Nazi society in the heart of America." What they discovered in the facility's main chambers exceeded every assumption they'd made about the network's capabilities and intentions. A complete underground city, housing hundreds of people who had been living in secret for generations. Manufacturing facilities producing weapons and equipment for a private army. And at the center of it all, a command center coordinating operations that reached across the entire North American continent. Operation Valkyrie American wasn't just about attacking government facilities. It was about implementing a complete transformation of American society according to Nazi principles. Robert looked at Ranger, whose enhanced senses were processing the scope of what they discovered with intelligence that bordered on human understanding. "Boy," Robert said quietly, "I think we just found where World War II really ended." The German Shepherd's response was a low growl that seemed to carry the weight of history and the promise of justice finally served. The underground city beneath the Sawtooth Mountains was a functioning Nazi state that had operated in secret for 70 years, complete with its own government, military, and plans for the conquest of North America. Robert moved through ventilation shafts that provided access to observation points throughout the facility, studying a society that had preserved and evolved Nazi ideology while remaining completely hidden from American intelligence services. The scope of what they discovered made every classified operation he participated in seem trivial by comparison. Below them, hundreds of people moved through chambers carved from living rock, their activities coordinated by a command structure that combined Nazi military organization with modern American technology. Children attended schools where they learned history that portrayed the Third Reich as misunderstood heroes, while adults worked in manufacturing facilities that produced weapons and equipment for the network's private army. Agent Morrison documented everything with equipment that would provide evidence for prosecutions that could expose the largest conspiracy in American history. But Ranger's increasingly agitated behavior suggested that their presence had been detected by security systems more sophisticated than anything she'd encountered in federal law enforcement. "They know we're here," Robert said, watching guard patrols move with the coordination of soldiers responding to specific intelligence about intruders. The facility's main command center revealed the true scope of Operation Valkyrie American. Maps covering entire walls showed targeted locations throughout the United States, government buildings, military installations, communication centers, and transportation hubs that would be attacked simultaneously to create the chaos necessary for a Nazi takeover of American institutions. But the most disturbing revelation was the timeline displayed on central screens. Operation Valkyrie American was scheduled to begin in less than 24 hours. "Tomorrow," Morrison breathed, photographing evidence that showed coordinated attacks planned for dozens of American cities. "They're going to try to overthrow the government tomorrow." Robert studied the operational plans with tactical expertise that allowed him to understand the sophistication of what the Nazi network had developed. This wasn't a terrorist attack or a simple coup attempt. It was a military operation designed to cripple American government capabilities while installing Nazi sympathizers in positions of authority. "They've spent 70 years planning this," Robert realized. "Every detail, every contingency, every possible response has been anticipated and countered." Ranger's warning growl drew their attention to movement in the command center below. Nazi officials were gathering for what appeared to be a final briefing before Operation Valkyrie American's implementation, their discussions revealing details that made Robert's military training scream urgent danger. The network had infiltrated American military commands deeply enough to ensure that official responses to their attacks would be delayed, misdirected, or actively sabotaged. Fighter aircraft would be grounded by maintenance issues. Military communications would be jammed by equipment operated from within defense installations. Emergency response would be crippled by coordinated attacks on command structures. "They're not just planning to attack America," Morrison said, understanding the scope of the conspiracy. "They're planning to use America's own military against itself." But the most shocking revelation came when Robert recognized faces among the Nazi leadership that made his hands shake with betrayal and rage. General Patricia Williams, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff; Senator Michael Crawford, head of the Senate Intelligence Committee; Director James Harrison of the Department of Homeland Security. People he'd seen on television, officials whose orders he'd followed during classified operations, leaders he'd trusted to protect American democracy. "The entire command structure is compromised," Robert said, watching American government officials coordinate with Nazi leadership as if they were natural allies rather than ideological enemies. Morrison's communication attempts were being blocked by jamming equipment that suggested the Nazi network had capabilities that exceeded federal law enforcement resources. They were trapped in a facility controlled by people who had spent generations preparing for this moment. with no way to warn legitimate government agencies about the attacks planned for the next day. Rangers' enhanced senses provided the solution to their tactical dilemma. The dog had detected weaknesses in the facility's structure that could be exploited to create the chaos necessary for escape and the transmission of warning messages to people who might be able to stop Operation Valkyrie American. The German Shepherd led them to a section of the underground city that housed the network's power generation and communication systems, equipment that had been built with the same precision that characterized everything about the Nazi facility, but with vulnerabilities that Rangers' enhanced genetics allowed him to identify. Sabotage, Robert said, understanding the dog's tactical assessment. We destroy their infrastructure and use the confusion to escape and warn the outside world. But Morrison's investigation of the facility's central database revealed something that changed their mission from escape to elimination. The Nazi network had developed biological weapons based on research that had been conducted in Wilhelm Brenner's bunker and similar facilities throughout the American West. Chemical agents designed to be deployed through water supplies, air conditioning systems, and food distribution networks during the chaos of Operation Valkyrie American. They're not just planning a political coup, Morrison said, her voice tight with horror. They're planning genocide. The biological weapons were designed to target specific genetic markers associated with ethnic groups that the Nazi network considered undesirable. Entire populations would be eliminated while the network's supporters remained unaffected, creating the demographic changes necessary for their vision of American society. Robert looked at Ranger, whose enhanced genetics represented both the pinnacle of military working dog development and the antithesis of everything the Nazi network represented. Boy, Robert said, I think it's time to finish what our grandfather started in 1945. Ranger's response was a bark that seemed to carry the voice of every soldier who had died fighting Nazi ideology, the determination of every person who had refused to accept hatred as a governing principle. The sabotage operation that followed was conducted with the precision of special operations training combined with the tactical intelligence of an enhanced German Shepherd whose genetics had been designed to serve freedom rather than oppression. When the explosions began, they created chaos that allowed Robert and Morrison to escape, while ensuring that Operation Valkyrie American would be crippled before it could begin. But as they fought their way out of the Nazi facility, Robert understood that destroying the underground city was only the beginning of a battle that would determine whether American democracy could survive an enemy that had been hiding in plain sight for 70 years. The Fourth Reich had been building toward this moment since 1945. Tomorrow, the world would learn whether hatred or freedom would prevail in the heart of America. At 6 a.m. Mountain Time, Operation Valkyrie American was scheduled to begin with coordinated attacks across 17 American cities. But Robert Castillo and Ranger were about to prove that some conspiracies could be stopped by the loyalty of a single soldier and his dog. The Emergency Command Center in the FBI's Denver field office had been transformed into a war room where legitimate federal agents worked frantically to coordinate responses to a threat that most government officials refused to believe was real. Agent Morrison's evidence from the Nazi facility had been deemed too extraordinary for immediate action by supervisors who couldn't comprehend that a 70-year-old conspiracy was hours away from overthrowing American democracy. Robert sat beside Ranger in a room filled with skeptical federal agents, watching satellite feeds that showed suspicious activity around target locations throughout the United States. Military vehicles moving into position near government buildings, communication anomalies at defense installations, personnel changes at key facilities that suggested the Nazi network was implementing final preparations for their coup attempt. Sir, Agent Morrison said to FBI Director Charles Patterson via secure video link, the evidence is overwhelming. We have documentation of planned attacks, biological weapons, and government officials who are coordinating with Nazi sympathizers. Patterson's response reflected the institutional resistance that had allowed the network to operate in secret for generations. Agent Morrison, I need more than photographs and captured documents to authorize military responses against American citizens. What you're describing sounds like a conspiracy theory, not a legitimate national security threat. Ranger's sudden alertness drew Robert's attention to movement outside the federal building. Through the windows, he could see vehicles taking positions that suggested the command center itself was about to be attacked by people who wanted to ensure that warnings about Operation Valkyrie American never reached higher authorities. Morrison, Robert said urgently, we're about to have company. The German Shepherd's enhanced senses were tracking multiple threats approaching the building with military coordination. Ranger's body language indicated that the assault would come from several directions simultaneously, using tactics designed to eliminate everyone who had knowledge of the Nazi conspiracy. Agent Morrison looked at the approaching vehicles and understood that institutional skepticism had just become a death sentence. Director Patterson, we're under attack by the same people I've been warning you about. The assault on the FBI command center began with electromagnetic pulse devices that disabled communication equipment and security systems, followed by coordinated breaches that demonstrated military training and equipment that exceeded standard law enforcement capabilities. Robert's response proved that special operations training never really faded. He moved through the facility with tactical precision that eliminated threats while protecting federal agents who were caught in a battle they hadn't been prepared to fight. Ranger's contribution was decisive. The German Shepherd's enhanced capabilities allowed him to predict enemy movements, coordinate defensive responses, and neutralize attackers whose military training hadn't prepared them to fight an enhanced animal whose genetics had been designed for exactly this kind of engagement. But the most effective aspect of their defense was Morrison's ability to continue transmitting evidence about Operation Valkyrie American even while under direct assault. Her communications reached federal agents throughout the country who began to understand that the attacks on their facility were connected to a much larger conspiracy. This is Agent Morrison, FBI Denver. She broadcast on emergency frequencies. We are under attack by Nazi operatives implementing Operation Valkyrie American. Multiple government facilities are targeted for simultaneous assault, beginning at 0600 Mountain Time. The response that followed proved that American democratic institutions could still function when faced with existential threats. Military commanders who had been kept out of the conspiracy began coordinating legitimate responses to Nazi network activities. Federal agents who had been suspicious of unusual orders began investigating their own command structures for signs of infiltration. But the most dramatic response came from an unexpected source. Enhanced military working dogs, whose genetics included capabilities similar to Rangers, began exhibiting behavior that suggested they could detect and counter Nazi network operatives who had infiltrated military installations. The enhanced dog program, Robert realized, watching satellite feeds that showed military working dogs throughout the country responding to threats that their handlers couldn't see. Someone else has been developing capabilities to counter the Nazi network. Morrison's investigation revealed that a classified program had been developing enhanced animals specifically to detect and neutralize threats from Nazi sympathizers who had infiltrated American institutions. The program had been operating in secret for decades, waiting for the moment when the network would reveal itself through overt action. Operation Valkyrie American was anticipated, Morrison said, understanding the scope of the preparations that had been made to counter the Nazi conspiracy. Someone has been preparing for this day since the end of World War II. But the most important revelation was that Ranger's genetics included programming that connected him to the enhanced animal network, allowing him to coordinate responses with military working dogs throughout the country. The German Shepherd's barking took on patterns that resembled communication protocols, his behavior suggesting that he was transmitting tactical information to other enhanced animals who were engaging Nazi operatives at facilities across the United States. He's coordinating a counter-operation, Robert said in amazement, watching Ranger work with intelligence that exceeded anything he'd seen in human military communications. The battle for control of American democracy played out across multiple time zones as enhanced animals led legitimate military personnel in operations that neutralized Nazi network assets before they could implement their planned attacks. At the Cheyenne Mountain Complex, enhanced German shepherds guided security forces to Nazi sympathizers who had planned to disable nuclear early warning systems. At FBI headquarters in Washington, enhanced Belgian Malinois led agents to conspirators who had intended to coordinate false flag operations. At military installations throughout the country, enhanced animals whose genetics had been designed to serve freedom rather than oppression helped eliminate threats that had been hiding in plain sight for generations. The dogs are winning the war, Morrison said, watching satellite feeds that showed successful operations at every target location the Nazi network had planned to attack. Robert looked at Ranger, whose enhanced genetics had been designed not just to serve individual handlers, but to protect democratic institutions from enemies who would use loyalty as a weapon against freedom. Boy, Robert said, scratching behind his partner's ears, I think your people have been planning this counterattack for 70 years. Ranger's response was a bark that seemed to carry the voice of every enhanced animal who had been bred, trained, and positioned to serve as guardians of American democracy. The Fourth Reich's attempt to conquer America had been defeated not by government agencies or military forces, but by the loyalty of animals whose genetics had been shaped by people who understood that some principles were worth any sacrifice to defend. Operation Valkyrie American was over before it began, crushed by creatures whose enhanced capabilities had been designed to ensure that loyalty would always triumph over hatred. 6 months after Operation Valkyrie American was defeated by enhanced animals whose genetics had been shaped to protect democracy, Robert Castillo stood beside Ranger's grave in a military cemetery where heroes rest beneath stones that mark their service to freedom. The headstone bore both their names, Robert and Ranger, partners who had discovered that some conspiracies span generations, and some loyalties transcend the boundaries between species. The inscription below read simply, "They found the truth hidden beneath. They ensured it would never hide again." The trials of Nazi network members had reshaped American understanding of how deeply enemy ideology could penetrate democratic institutions. 47 government officials convicted of treason, hundreds of military personnel dishonorably discharged, an entire shadow government dismantled by evidence that a German shepherd had led his partner to discover beneath the cabin floor. Agent Morrison approached across the cemetery grounds, carrying files that contained the final pieces of a conspiracy that had operated for 70 years. The enhanced animal program has been declassified, she reported. The American people deserve to know how their democracy was protected by creatures whose loyalty couldn't be corrupted. Robert nodded, understanding that Ranger's sacrifice had revealed truths that were too important to remain classified. The German shepherd's enhanced genetics had been part of a program designed by scientists who understood that some threats to freedom required defenders whose loyalty was absolute. How many animals were involved? Robert asked. Over 300 enhanced dogs, cats, and other species positioned throughout government and military installations, Morrison replied. All of them bred and trained with genetic modifications that made them incapable of betraying democratic principles. The Enhanced Animal Program had been America's secret weapon against infiltration by ideologies that sought to destroy freedom from within. While Nazi sympathizers spent decades positioning themselves in government agencies, enhanced animals had been quietly monitoring their activities and preparing for the moment when intervention would be necessary. But Ranger's role had been unique. His genetics included capabilities that exceeded the standard enhanced animal parameters. allowing him to serve as a coordinator for operations that spanned the entire continent. He was the alpha, Robert realized, understanding why Ranger's behavior had always seemed more sophisticated than normal military working dog training. His genetics were designed to lead other enhanced animals in protecting democracy. Morrison showed Robert classified files that revealed the scope of Ranger's genetic programming. The dog hadn't just been enhanced for loyalty and intelligence. He'd been designed to serve as a living embodiment of democratic principles, incapable of accepting orders that violated human freedom and dignity. The scientists who created the enhanced animal program were Holocaust survivors, Morrison explained. They understood that the greatest threat to democracy wasn't external invasion, but internal corruption by people who would use loyalty as a weapon against freedom. Robert looked at Ranger's grave, understanding that the German Shepherd's genetics had been shaped by people who had witnessed the worst capabilities of human hatred and had dedicated their lives to ensuring that such darkness could never again triumph over light. The enhanced animal program had been their gift to future generations, guardians whose loyalty to freedom was written into their DNA, protectors who couldn't be corrupted by ideology or intimidated by power. What happens to the program now? Robert asked. It continues, Morrison replied. Enhanced animals will remain positioned throughout government and military installations, serving as an early warning system against any future attempts to corrupt American institutions. But the most important aspect of the program's future was the breeding initiative that would ensure enhanced animals remained available to protect democracy for generations to come. A young German shepherd approached across the cemetery, moving with intelligence that reminded Robert of Ranger's purposeful alertness. The puppy's genetics carried the same enhancements that had made Ranger capable of detecting and defeating Nazi conspiracies, but his mission would be focused on protection rather than revelation. His name is Liberty, Morrison said, watching the young dog approach Robert with confident steps. His genetics include improvements based on what we learned from Ranger's capabilities. Robert knelt as Liberty reached him, looking into amber eyes that held wisdom inherited from a lineage of animals whose loyalty had been shaped to serve freedom rather than oppression. Liberty, Robert said, scratching behind the puppy's ears. You've got some big paws to fill. The young German shepherd's response was a bark that seemed to carry echoes of Ranger's voice, a sound of recognition, inherited purpose, and love that transcended the modifications that had shaped their existence. Robert understood that his partnership with Ranger had been preparation for a new mission. Liberty would need a handler who understood the responsibilities that came with caring for an animal whose genetics had been designed to protect the foundations of American democracy. Are you ready for another 20 years of service? Morrison asked. Robert looked at Liberty, whose enhanced genetics represented both the culmination of scientific achievement and the promise that democratic institutions would never again be vulnerable to corruption from within. Liberty, Robert said. I think Ranger would approve of continuing the mission. The young dog's tail wagged with enthusiasm that suggested he understood the legacy he was inheriting and the responsibilities that came with genetics designed to serve freedom. As they walked away from Ranger's grave, Robert reflected on the journey that had begun with a dog scratching at cabin floorboards and ended with the exposure of a conspiracy that had threatened the foundation of American democracy. The Nazi network had spent 70 years preparing for their moment of triumph, but they had underestimated the power of loyalty that couldn't be corrupted, courage that couldn't be intimidated, and love that couldn't be defeated. Ranger's genetics had been shaped by scientists who understood that the greatest defense against hatred was not weapons or walls, but creatures whose loyalty to freedom was written into their very DNA. The German Shepherd's legacy would live on in Liberty and hundreds of other enhanced animals whose genetics would protect democracy for generations yet unborn. Some partnerships transcend individual service to become guardians of principles that make freedom possible. Some dogs become legends whose loyalty echoes through history. And some secrets, once revealed, ensure that darkness can never again hide in the shadows, while liberty shines in the light. The truth had been found beneath the floorboards of a remote cabin. The future would be protected by genetics designed to serve freedom forever.